I'm gonna invite Dr. Beth O'Brien. She is the head of the Early and Middle Childhood Research at the OER Center of Research in Child Development and a principal research scientist at NID.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? In the back? Okay. Thanks very much. So Susie gave us a nice introduction and a lot of details about what's going on in Singapore. My research, I'm very interested in children's dual language learning, and I work in research studies with kindergartners and older children in early primary school, and I'm particularly interested in learning to read. So I'll give a little bit more information about reading and some early skills related to reading. But in terms of biliteracy, well, first I'll give a little summary that maybe reinstate some of the things that Susie went through. And then we'll go into some talk about how bilingualism differs across individuals a bit, and then ways that we can improve bilingual balance. And then I'll talk more specifically about reading, the skills that are involved in reading, and then touch on developmental language disorders, what they mean, and then some ideas for how we can get our children to read more and to be engaged more in reading. So some of the research that we conduct here in Singapore includes different methods, and that includes things like surveys. So we ask parents to give us reports about what kind of languages are used in the home, what types of activities do you do with your child, do you read together, how often, in what language. Then we also do some behavioral assessments with children. So we ask them to do things like identify words by pointing to a picture that matches a word meaning, so like a vocabulary type of evaluation. Then we also have some early reading tasks, so asking them to name words or identify or spell words. And then finally, you'll hear some more work about research that's going on at NTU and NIE in brain studies. So what's happening in the brain when children are using different languages or when they're reading in different languages. So this might be a little bit of a review, but as Susie was mentioning, the differences between the languages that are used in Singapore are shown here in these graphs on the left. So we can see that the blue area is English, families that report that English is mostly spoken in the home. And we see the increase over time. So there's more English dominance in homes. But if we look at the pie chart on the right over here, of the families where English was the dominant language used in home, there was only about 13% of those homes where English was the only language used. So again, I think this reiterates what Susie was showing with her graphics, that many families are using more than one language at home. The other interesting thing, and these are all data that we pulled down from the Singapore census data. You can look at this yourself online, but the other interesting thing was with regard to literacy. So we see that in Singapore, there are very high literacy rates, very good education system here. People learn to read at a high rate. But also we can see that on the right side, the orange part of the circles indicates the number of people that report being able to read in more than one language. Sometimes we refer to this as bilingual literacy or biliteracy. And this shows that over time, even though we saw in homes there's more oral use of English, there's also a higher percentage of people that are learning to read in more than two languages over time. So this is a good sign. The other thing that Susie pointed out was that some earlier research, when people would look at bilingualism, they would often compare bilingual groups of people with monolingual groups of people. And so the thought was that bilinguals are all the same. But as we can see, and as Susie really pointed out as well with her data, there are different cases. There's very individual aspects, or what she's referred to as bilingual fingerprints. So just as your fingerprint is unique from anyone else, any form of bilingualism can be very unique to a person or to a family. And so we see that some people learn two languages at the same time. We call that simultaneous bilingualism. Some people learn one language after they've learned their first language. We call that sequential bilingualism. In some cases, people know their languages to an equal extent, or they're equally proficient. In some cases, one language is more dominant than the other. So whether they're balanced or dominant, we call that. And then there's also cases where when people use their languages, they use exclusively one language in one context. So you speak English at work, but then when you come home, you speak Mandarin to the family. And then there's other cases, like the example Susie showed, where people switch between languages in a way that's referred to as translanguaging. So maybe substituting words in a sentence where you're predominantly using English, but substitute a mother tongue word in the middle. And so this happens naturally when children are learning two languages. It's observed that children do this and adults do this as well. So it can be either intentionally done or it just happens that that's the way you use your languages. Okay. So another question is, I think some of the points that Susie pointed out was, how do you get your child to use more than one language? How do you get them to become more balanced in their language use? And so one way is the example that she showed with shared reading has been shown to be a really good way to get children to learn the language. It's engaging, you spend time together, and it's also a very good way to learn new words. So there's a lot of resources available, including at the National Library Board, that have activities, and they also can make suggestions for different books that families can use or take out. Another way to get children engaged is to get them engaged in media. So if there are television programs, for example, I'm not encouraging children to watch television all the time, but some programs can be fun for kids to watch. Cartoons can be broadcast in different languages, so that can be helpful just to increase the exposure that they get to other languages. And in some cases, there are also educational games that are on digital formats that children can play. Okay, so why is reading important in particular? Reading is, as mentioned, a very good way to learn new words. So children are engaged when you're reading together. You can read the words aloud. And what children do when they're reading is that they not only hear the sounds of the words, but they also see how the word is written. So they get multimodal connections between the sounds of the word, the way it's printed, as well as its meaning. And so you can talk about the words while you're reading the story together. So I'm going to go through each of these kind of forms, whether it's a word that is in its spoken form, we refer to this as phonology. In its written form, we refer to as orthography. And then the meaning of words I'll talk about in terms of morphology, or the meaning structure of language. And so each of these are important for reading. Phonological awareness you may have heard of, but this is very important also for reading, and it's about recognizing and working with speech sounds in the language. These are just some definitions again. So it's the ability to recognize those speech sounds and to do things like, I'm not sure how to read. Sorry. Okay, there's supposed to be another part of this. I think I'm stuck. Okay. Sorry, my slides got stuck. So there's supposed to be a graphic in here, but it's not scrolling forward. Yeah, there we go. Sorry. Sorry about the technical difficulty there. So when we talk about phonological awareness, there's actually different levels of phonology or phonological structure. And children tend to learn this at different stages as they grow up. So the first phase of phonological awareness would involve things like learning about rhyme patterns in words, so words that rhyme together, and then learning about the beginning and the ending sounds of words. And then finally, and this coincides with their learning to read, they learn about the individual speech sounds. And some children can seem to pick this up naturally, but some need more help. And it always helps to do things like play games with children that reinforce their development in these skills. So for example, word level awareness, you can play rhyming games where you ask children to come up with words that rhyme together, or alliteration where you talk about words that have the same sound at the beginning. And then you can also have them develop their syllable awareness. Sometimes you can play a game like have them count or clap to the different syllables in the word. And I'll give some examples next to this. And then you can talk about onset and rhyme awareness. And then finally, counting out each phoneme or each speech sound in a word. So for an example here would be if you can yourself maybe take a few minutes to go through the first line and say how many syllables are there in each word in the first line. So for cats, how many syllables would everyone say? 1. Okay, very good, that's right. Capital, how many syllables are there in capital? Would everyone agree there's 3? Okay, everyone's very good at this. Shirt, also 1. Okay, one kind of trick, maybe it's a bit of a hack, but each syllable you might notice has a vowel sound in it. So one way to kind of figure it out is how many vowel sounds are there. But these are the types of games. You can also make this into a game that you can play with your child, and then they can become more aware of syllables at this stage. Okay, this is a little more challenging, but let's try it. So I'm going to have you just count how many phonemes are in the word thrill. This is actually harder when you're a reader. And it's because in English in particular, we can have one phoneme represented by multiple letters. So actually the T and the H only make up one phoneme. And then the R is its own phoneme, the I is a phoneme, and the L. So we have 4, right? Okay, let's just try another quick one. How about this one? Fix. How many people say 3? How many people say 4? Mostly 3, but this is actually 4, even though there's 3 letters. Again, our print knowledge gets in the way of doing this task, but the X actually has 2 phonemes. If you sound it out, it's K and S. X are 2 sounds. So fix has actually 4 sounds. Okay, let me just try a few other things where we can just see if you can match the phonemes here. So the sh and push, which of these words shares the same sound as in push? Sugar? Everyone agree? Sugar? Okay, that's right. How about this one? The A and way. Which word matches the phoneme in way? I hear a few raids. If you picked raid, it's actually correct, but interestingly, again, the spelling doesn't match this at all, but the sound does. So this is another point about English. It's a very in what we call an inconsistent language because the spelling and the sound don't always match one another. So these are other types of games when your child is a little bit older, when they're starting to read or they're getting ready to read. You can do these types of phonemic awareness games with them. Okay, next I'm going to briefly go through what we refer to as orthographic knowledge or orthographic depth. And so while we know that phonological awareness is important for reading in general across all languages, all written languages code oral language. Some of them represent this oral language in a different way. So the way that the print relates to the oral language differs between English, Tamil, Chinese. These all have different ways of coding out or encoding the sounds of the language. And as we just saw, languages, even when they code sound by sound, like alphabetical languages will code for every single phoneme in the word. Some of them do this more regularly or more consistently, and some of them are more inconsistent, like we saw with English. And so we have what we refer to as transparent languages that are pretty clearly one-to-one correspondence between a sound and the print, or the print and the way it sounds. And this includes things like Malay and Tamil, they're pretty consistent, as well as Pinyin, the Pinyin form of Chinese. So I don't know if anyone can speak Malay in the audience, but how would you pronounce these 2 words? Okay, I'm not going to try it, but they should sound the same. and that's represented by their similar spelling as well. But for English, how would you pronounce these two words? Sound very different, right? So here again, the spelling's quite similar, but the sounds, in this case, they're not rhyming words. The sounds are quite different. So this makes English a difficult language to learn to read, and indeed it takes, as studies have shown, it takes children longer to read these types of inconsistent languages. Okay, and this leads us to something that I think might be followed up on in the next talk, but there's a theory about reading where in some cases reading can be more direct. So you see a word and you automatically know how the word sounds and the meaning of the word. And this oftentimes will occur with languages that are not alphabetic, like Chinese. So you see a character and there's no way to decode this like you decode alphabetic languages. On the other hand, you also have what we refer to as a sublexical or indirect route. And this is the type of decoding that we were just practicing, right? So you see the print and you can letter by letter or sound out what the print could be. So you could read this word, but it doesn't have any meaning to it. So it's not related to word meaning or lexical knowledge, what we would call word knowledge. Okay, I'm gonna go now to the last component is what we refer to as morphological awareness about understanding the meaning structure of the language. So here we are looking at how words can be broken down into smaller meaning units. So just like with phonological awareness, you can break words down to the smallest sound unit, the phoneme. With morphological awareness, it's about breaking words down into the smallest units of meaning. So you can consider root words like happy, and you can put affix on them or a suffix on them and make them mean something different. And so this also happens at the syllable level. So this helps us to make sense of multi-syllable words and compound words. And so this awareness becomes very important when children get a little bit older. So when they're in 3rd, 4th grade and the texts get a little bit thicker with long words, when they have to sound out long words, it helps them that they understand the meaning structure of the words, particularly when they're learning things like science terms. Sometimes children have weaker morphological awareness, and so we encourage maybe to develop these skills as well. So here's an example of the types of tasks that we use. Oops, sorry. Let's do this part again. Sorry, Faith, I'm a little inadept at this. So these are some examples like we did before. Oh, there you go. You can put it, yeah, more there. So these are examples of the types of tasks that we do with children in some of our assessments to see how developed are they in their morphological awareness? How much do they understand about the meaning structure of words? So we can ask them things like, are these two sets of words related? So what do you think about number 1 versus number 2? Are number 1 and number 2, are the words related in both cases? So number 1, teacher and teach are the same, come from the same meaning, but P and peace, no. How about things like pass or passive? Not so much. Soften and soft? Yes. Okay. So the children need to know something about word meanings and how the suffixes and affixes are applied to words to change their meanings. We also do things like this type of task where we ask children pick out the word that doesn't mean this, share the same meaning. So which one of classroom, bedroom, and mushroom means something different? Mushroom's not a type of room, right? So we have a lot of these different types of examples where we ask children, you know, if we give you undo, uncle, and unlock, which one of these is the oddball? And so here it would be uncle because the UN doesn't mean the same thing as it does in the other words. Okay. I think last 2 slides, I just have 2 more slides, so if that's okay. So the other thing that we're studying in our research is with regard to developmental language disorders, and this includes things like difficulty that children would have with producing speech sounds or else understanding words in context. And also another language skills difficulty is with reading. So children also could have dyslexia, where they're having particular difficulty with learning to identify words by decoding them, with spelling, and also with identifying speech sounds. So in this case, a good predictor, early predictor of children that might struggle with learning to read is whether they have poor phonological awareness skills. But also in other languages, some research that's been done in China and Hong Kong, for example, some languages show that morphological awareness, the types of tasks I just showed you, when children perform poorly on those tasks, that's a better predictor of learning to read in Chinese. Okay, this is just one last tip. So sometimes parents would ask us, how do I pick out a storybook or a book to read with my child, or to have my child read themselves if they're old enough to read independently? And so one trick that you can use is to use what we call the 5-finger rule, where you can pick a book, go through the first page and see how many words that if the child's reading themselves, the child doesn't know. And if you put up one word for every word you don't know, if you have 5 fingers that go up, 5 words that aren't known, then that might be too difficult. But if there's only 2 or 3 fingers that go up, that would be just about right. So here you're looking for books that aren't too easy, are a little bit more challenging and engaging, but they're not too challenging that the child would get frustrated. Okay, so hopefully that all made sense, and we can talk about questions afterwards, but I think we'll do our next presentation.